Welcome, candidates. Today we will continue with a chapter on writing skills. The subject is known as communication skills. In our today's session, we are going to study forms and questionnaires. Two things, forms and questionnaires. We'll first tackle questionnaires. I mean forms. We'll first tackle forms. What is a form? A form, candidates, a business form is a logically structured document. It is a logically structured document. It is a logically structured document with fixed arrangement of captioned spaces. Fixed arrangement of captioned spaces that is designed for entering, for extracting, or communicating the required information. So it is a logically structured document. It can be a hard copy document. It can be a soft copy document that has spaces, captioned spaces that are meant to be filled. That is a form. And there are certain guidelines there are certain guidelines that can be followed when designing a form. Guidelines, let's outline the guidelines. When developing a form, there are certain guidelines that ought to be followed. Number one, the function and the reference number of the form should be clearly shown. One, function of the form should be shown clearly. There has to be a heading, candidates. For example, if it is an application form, then there has to be at the top of the form the words application form. So that will indicate the function of the form. An application form is a logically structured document with fixed arrangement and caption spaces for entering the information that is required for from the one that is making an application. That's the first guideline. The second guideline when developing a form is that the name of the organization should be shown at the top. Name of the organization. The name of the organization that is issuing the form should be shown at the top. And we are talking about forms that are not internally used. If it is a form that is meant to be used externally, then the name of the organization should appear at the top. The third guideline is that the form should not be complicated. The overall design of the form should not be complicated. Overall design of the form should not be complicated. The overall design of the form should not be complicated. All right, should be simple. The fourth one is that the wordings should be clear, and concise. The wording should be what? Should be clear and also concise. We said here that a form is a structured document with fixed arrangement of captioned spaces. So that means that the spaces that are provided should be sufficient. There should be sufficient room to be allowed for the information requested. Sufficient space should be allowed because it's captioned space. If is a space, for example, to indicate the telephone number, then there ought to be sufficient space or room to write a telephone number. If you require the names, the three names of a person to be indicated on the form, then you need to leave sufficient room to indicate three names of the applicant. Sufficient spaces should be allowed for providing the information that is required. So these are some of the guidelines. They are not the only guidelines. We can also say the information should be presented logically. Number 6. Information should be presented logically. You said here that a form is a logically structured document. So the information that is requested should be sequential, should be logically presented or arranged. The information should be presented logically. Instructions should also be clear. Number 7. Instructions on the form should be clear. There should be clarity in the information in regard to the instructions on the form. So these are guidelines. There are many guidelines, like you can say that where copies are required, color coding should be used. For example, the top copy should be for a customer. The top copy for a customer should be, say, in color white. The second copy to the, say, purchasing department should be, say, in pink. Then the third copy to the accounts should be, say, in color yellow. So if it's a form that is to be distributed to several parties where copies are required for in different departments, then each department should have a copy in its own or different color. So these are some of the guidelines that ought to be followed when designing a form, which you've said it is a business form. It is a logically structured document. A form is a document, and it is structured sequentially with the fixed arrangement of captioned spaces that are meant to enter information, to extract information, and also to communicate the required information. These are forms. Then we have questionnaires. 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 What is a questionnaire? A questionnaire is a formalized set of questions. It is a formalized set of questions. From the word question, we have questionnaire. It's a formalized set of questions for obtaining information from respondents. A set of questions for the purpose is to do what? To obtain, for obtaining information from respondents. Questionnaires are used to gather information from respondents. It is a list, just a list of written questions that can be completed in one or two basic ways, which are, number one, the questions can be completed in two basic ways, where number one is where the respondents could be asked to complete the questions with the researcher not present. With the researcher not present. For example, a researcher can compile a set of questions, then the researcher sends the questions via, say, post office or via email for the purposes of filling in, so that the respondent fills in when fills the forms when the researcher is not present. Another way is when the researcher is present. The respondent can fill this form when researcher is present. That's another way in which questionnaires can be filled by the respondents. So here, candidates, respondents could be asked to complete the questions by verbally responding to questions in the presence of the researcher. And we can also say that questionnaires are restricted to two basic types of questionnaires. There are two basic types of questionnaires. The first one is close-ended. The closed-ended or closed question. All right? The closed-ended question or the closed-ended, closed question or close-ended question. That is one type of a questionnaire. Now, a closed-ended questionnaire is where a question for which a researcher provides a suitable list of responses. You can have a yes and no. This is where the researcher provides a list of questions and the researcher gives suggested solutions, and that solution or answer to the question can be in form of yes or no. And here, candidates, the kind of questions produced here, we can say quantitative. This is what we call sometimes quantitative data. The researcher is able to obtain quantitative data through closed-ended questions. Then we can have open-ended questions. Open-ended questions. Open-ended question or open question. This is a question where the researcher does not provide the respondent with a set of answers to choose from. Rather, the respondent is asked to answer in their own words. And where respondents answer in their own words, what is obtained from such questions is what we call qualitative data. Here we said is known as quantitative. Quantitative is data is obtained where the respondent has to provide answers to closed-ended questions. Qualitative data is obtained where the respondent has to provide answers to open-ended questions. Open-ended questions. So a questionnaire, candidates, I repeat, is a set of questions that are used to obtain information from respondents. It's just a list of written questions that can be completed in one or two basic ways, where the researcher is present, where the researcher or where the researcher is not present. Now, having understood what questionnaires are, we are going to discuss or to outline advantages. What are the advantages of using questionnaires to obtain information from respondents? The first advantage is that the researcher is able to obtain information or data from a large number of respondents. A researcher can obtain data from a large number of respondents or people quickly, easily, and efficiently using, say, emailed questionnaires, since he or she does not have to interview people one-on-one, does not have to get information one-on-one. What one will need is to develop a set of questions and then emails the questions to respondents, so that can allow a researcher to obtain data from a large number of respondents. Questionnaires number 2 are relatively quick and easy. Obtaining data using questionnaires takes a shorter period of time. It is easy to create questionnaires, easy to do coding, and also easy to interpret, especially if they are closed questions. In addition, the respondent and not the researcher does the time-consuming part of completing the form. Here, it is the respondents who takes time to fill the form. That's why we are saying it is relatively quick on the part of the researcher. The third advantage is that a questionnaire is easy to standardize. Easy to standardize. It's easy to standardize questionnaires. For example, every respondent may be asked the same questions in the same way. And therefore, the researcher can be sure that everyone in the sample answers exactly the same question. That is standardizing of the question. It's easy to standardize the questions. The third benefit or advantage of using questionnaires is that questionnaires can be used to explore potentially embarrassing areas. Potentially embarrassing areas. Questionnaires can be used to gather information from areas that are embarrassing, all right? Embarrassing areas such as criminal matters, sensitive matters like sex, all right? Sexual matters, criminal matters can be, the information can be obtained easily through questionnaires, all right? the information can be obtained more easily than other methods like one-on-one. Sometimes asking people questions on crime or matters to do with sex can be embarrassing in certain cultures. All right, so the questionnaire can easily be used to obtain such information, where the respondents can answer the question from the point of anonymity. The questionnaire can be both anonymous, and it can as well be completed in privacy. And that increases the chances of people answering questions honestly, because they are not intimidated by the presence of the researcher. So these are 4 advantages of questionnaires, using questionnaires to gather information. So what are the limitations? Limitations of questionnaires. Limitations of using questionnaires to gather information. Number 1 is in relation to designing. Designing. The format of questionnaire design makes it difficult for the researcher to examine complex issues and opinions. Even where open-ended questions are used, candidates, the depth of answers that the respondent can provide tend to be more limited than with other methods that the researcher can use, like interviewing and all that. Because with interviewing, the respondent can ask questions, can seek clarification where questions are not clear. But with questionnaires, sometimes designing questions that can cause the respondents to give the required information may be difficult. The format of questionnaire design. Okay? Format of questionnaire design can be difficult to develop. The second limitation of using questionnaires is that with postal questionnaires, the researcher can never be certain that the person to whom the questionnaire is sent actually filled it. I'm talking about questionnaires that are sent and the researcher is not present. Remember, we said here that there are 2 ways in which the researcher can gather information using the questionnaires. Number 1 is where the researcher is not present. Number 2 is where the researcher is present. Now, where the questionnaire is filled and the researcher is not present, then the researcher cannot be sure that the person who filled the form or the questionnaire is the right person. The researcher can never be certain. This is uncertainty. The researcher cannot be certain that the one who received the questionnaire is the one who filled it. So that is a limitation, especially where the researcher is targeting certain individuals. For example, where the researcher wants information from, say, accountants, and he emails the questionnaire or sends the questionnaire via post office to the accountants. Then the disadvantage here is that the one who fills the questionnaire could be the accountant's wife or the accountant's husband. So there is no uncertainty as to whether the one who is targeted is the one who provides the information. The third disadvantage of using questionnaires is that where the researcher is not present, it's always difficult to know. Okay? It's not difficult to know whether or not the respondent understood a question properly. Understanding of questions properly can be a problem. because we are talking here when the respondent fills the questionnaire when the researcher is not present. It's not easy for the researcher to know if the respondent understands the questions. And one way to avoid such a problem is to have a researcher present when the form is being filled, or to conduct a pilot study prior to conducting the real survey. So there can be a pilot study where the researcher sends like dummy questions or does a pilot study so that when the researcher receives the responses from the respondents, then he can know if the respondents understands or understood the questions within the questionnaire. Another limitation is in relation to the response rate. Response rate. That is the number of questionnaires that are actually returned to the researcher may tend to be very low to the ones that were sent to the respondents. The response rate may be low. Low response rate. The response rate should be not less than 20% or 25%. Okay, 25% of the questionnaires that are sent should at least be returned. All right, if you send, say, out of 100, if you receive 25 or 30 of the 30%, then that is comfortable response rate. But if you receive 10%, that could be too low rate. Anything below 30%, that could be a low response rate. So a 20 to 25% return of questionnaires is probably something that most researchers would happily settle for. And that may mean that a carefully designed sample becomes unrepresentative of the target population. The fifth limitation of using questionnaires is that there is a problem of self-selecting sample, which is particularly apparent in relation to questionnaires. All right, self-selecting sample. Now, when the response rate is very low, the responses received may only be the opinions of the very highly motivated section of the sample. That is, people with strong opinions will take the time, will take the trouble to complete and return a questionnaire. So when the response rate is low, even the ones who returns the questionnaire is just a sample of the people who have strong opinions, the people who don't give up. So these are the limitations of using questionnaires. And that will mark the end of our today's lesson, candidates. We've learned about forms and questionnaires. We've defined a form. What is a form? We've defined what is a questionnaire. We've outlined in our today's lesson the guidelines of developing a form. We've said that the function of the form should be shown clearly at the top. If it's an application form, then right at the top, application form. Number two, you say that the name of the organization should be indicated on the form at the top, the name of the organization. And that is the case if the form is to be used externally. But if the form is used internally, then there may be no reason or need to have the name of the organization on the form. Then the third guideline is that the overall design of the form should not be complicated. Number 4, the wording should be clear and concise. The form should not be detailed where you open pages. No, it's supposed to be clear and concise. Then number 5, you say that there should be sufficient spaces for filling the form. Remember, a form is a logically structured document with fixed arrangement of captioned spaces. So the spaces that are left on the form should be sufficient enough to provide the information that is required. Number 6, you've said that information should be presented logically. There should be a certain sequence, sequentially arranged questions that follow a certain logic. Okay, there should be a certain flow of questions that will allow information to be presented logically, the spaces, and so on. So number 7, we learned that instructions should be clear. The instructions on the form ought to be clear. So these are the guidelines that one has to follow when developing a business form. Then we've defined what is a questionnaire. We say that a questionnaire is just a list of questions that are used to obtain information from respondents. We've said that there are 2 ways that these questionnaires can be filled. That's 1, where the researcher is not present. Number 2, where the researcher is present. Where the researcher is present, then the questions can be read to the respondent, and the respondent provides answers. It takes the form of an interview. Then there are 2 types of questions. Number 1, we said there are close-ended questions and open-ended questions. Now, the open-ended questions, we've said, give rise to qualitative data, whereas the open-ended questions give rise to qualitative data. In this lesson, candidates, we've also studied the advantages of questionnaires. We've said that questionnaires can provide data from a large number of respondents. Questionnaires are relatively quick. Questionnaires are easy to standardize. The questions can be standardized. 1 question can be sent to all the respondents so that the researcher can know that the questions were answered by all the respondents. Then we've said that questionnaires can be used to gather information from respondents in areas that could be embarrassing situations, like criminal matters, sexual matters, and so on. Those are areas that respondents may not feel comfortable to provide information when maybe dealing with them one-on-one. But where respondents feel questions from a point of anonymity and privacy, then there is high chance that the researcher can obtain information from people, okay? From people. We know that there are people who may not be comfortable talking about sexual matters out of the way people are raised, culture, and so on. We know certain cultures, even mentioning the word sex is not easy. So people may get embarrassed when providing data on such matters. So questionnaires comes in handy. When people ask questions in privacy through questionnaires without them revealing their identity, then there is high chance that the researcher can obtain questions. Then we went further to discuss the limitations in today's lesson of using questionnaires to gather data. Number 1 is in relation to the design. We say that the format of a questionnaire design makes it difficult for the researcher to do what? To examine complex issues and opinions. And even where open-ended questions are used, we say that the depth of answers that the respondent can provide may tend to be limited than when other methods of collecting data are used. we mentioned or cited the limitation on uncertainty. We said that if a researcher is concerned, or where a researcher uses emailed questionnaires or questionnaires that are sent by post, the researcher can never be certain that the person to whom the questionnaire is sent actually fills in the form. For example, if the research is concerned with finding out, I'm giving an example, the opinions of women on a range of issues, it would be less useful if there is a known number of questionnaires that are sent where they are filled by men, all right? If a researcher is looking for information from women and the questionnaires that are sent are filled in by men, then that information that is gathered may not be useful for the researcher when the questionnaires are received. Uncertainty. In today's lesson, we also learned that understanding of questions can be a problem when questionnaires are used. We also cited the response rate could be low. Then lastly, we say that there could be a problem of self-selecting sample, particularly where the response rate is very low. The response received but may only be opinions of those who are strong-willed people. So these are the limitations, these are the advantages of questionnaires. So thank you for attending today's lesson. I'm going to give you just one question here for your assignment. The assignment is highlight 4 advantages and 4 limitations of using questionnaires to gather information. Candidates, when answering that question, make sure your notebook is closed. Try and see if you can recall what you have learned from your memory. Go through the video one more time, then close the book, take a blank paper or a blank page, try and answer the question. Highlight 4 advantages and 4 limitations of using questionnaires to do what? To gather information. Thank you. God bless you. Bye-bye.